Games Workshop wouldn't tell you this on its first Tinder date, but throughout the late 70s and through most of the 80s, they were importers, distributors, and dealers in other people's shit. Legally, that is, I might add, sounded way more sinister than it ever needed to do. Dungeons and Dragons, Cthulhu, RuneQuest, if you wanted to get that stuff at that time, then chances are you needed to go through the now established yellow and red brand. Of course, in the 80s, they would eventually go on to manufacture their own stuff and stuff for other people's franchises. So you get things like the Dread board game, you get things like the Dread miniatures game, and a fusion of all those ideas of the manufacturing for other people would eventually come together, something maybe a few of you might recognize today. It would be nice to think that they didn't steal that shit, but So after the success of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, they would later try their hand at adapting another universe they had into a roleplay format. They took their long-standing and fairly successful history of porting roleplay games, the success they had with making a roleplay game, as well as Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader area, which most will agree is more roleplay than wargame, and created essentially what we now know, or we now have forgotten, as Inquisitor. I recently came across this sealed Inquisitor horde along with a load of metal Tyranids, and it was wedged behind a gentleman's toilet upon pickup, so I thought, I should probably liberate this for the greater good. Along with that, weirdly, was a Skulls catalogue. Anybody remember Skulls? I wonder if these are still good on their promise of a free t-shirt. Probably not. I'm not going to say what I paid for all this because, well, mind your own fucking business. So to super simplify, Inquisitor basically is a fusion of tabletop miniature combat and role-playing games. You take the wheel behind one of many pre-established characters, and the games master takes multiple models to essentially craft a narrative for the players, using the foundation of a physical miniatures game to have things play out across a tabletop. The idea of something like this now, where 3D printing is advanced as it is just screaming mad appeal to me. Can you imagine miniatures now scaled up to like 54mm or fuck, even 75mm, and with appropriately scaled battlefield terrain? Would basically be Kill Team with action figures. And that would be pretty fucking sick. You can piss and moan all you want about 3D printing being illegal and like polluting our children's innocence or whatever, but I would definitely do time inside for a speakeasy that had like a lever you pull down and then all the 28mm tables just flip over, and then we got like 75mm underneath. Shh, keep it secret, keep it safe. And in standard tabletop RPG practice, you have experience, loot, equipment, character creation, pre-generated enemies, pre-generated characters, pretty much all the good stuff you need to get started. You can play anything from Inquisitors, Space Marines, AdMech, Rogue Traders, Cultists, Imperial Guard if you really want to be a glutton for punishment, Desperados, Enforcers, Mutants, Nuns with Guns, Archos, Assassins, and Demon Hosts. I'm pretty sure there's enough material and fluff in here to adapt new factions and new characters that have come out in the last 20 years that you might be attached to and you want to use in this game, which I'm 100% down with. The contents page seems to be afforded to combat because I suppose in the 41st millennium there is only war, and war never changes. This is distinctly uncharacteristic, I would say, of like most of the popular RPGs out there, in the sense that from what I've talked to RPG groups about in regard to combat, they usually say it's the most boring part. Maybe it's down to the combat mechanics not being as fleshed out or as interesting as the fluff and the characters you make, or maybe it's because your character's been talking a big talk and then the dice roll and it's snake eyes and you end up getting your skull caved in and dying on the first encounter. But basically, what they've said to me is that combat is the least interesting part. However, if you were to say to me, what do you imagine a roleplay session set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe looks like, I would most likely describe it as... and anything else, character progression, like equipment, experience, whatever, is a bonus. Maybe, for Games Workshop and Warhammer 40,000, this was actually the right way to go. Of course, I'm oversimplifying and generalizing here, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with... and quite frankly, I would love a roleplay game consisting entirely of... For that to work, your combat mechanics have got to be tight. Looking through this book, if nothing else, it's a wistful venture into this dark underverse of what 40k was represented as at the time. I absolutely love the artwork, and if you ask me, the 40k universe has never looked better than it did in black and white. These feverish sketches create a frenzied kinetic energy or a skin-crawling stillness to the moments that they depict. And we're going to move on to the miniatures shortly and well, maybe even paint one. But before we do that, I need to make a speedy segue into something called Fanatic. What the fuck is Fanatic? Fanatic is a magazine that catered to the specialist games by Games Workshop. Battlefleet Gothic, Blood Bowl, Epic, Inquisitor, Mordheim, Necromunda, and Warmaster. It ran for 10 issues, and I tried to get hold of issue 10, but the best I could muster was a flaccid offering of issues 1 to 9. But as Confucius says, a flaccid 9 is better than an hard 10. Fanatic is a curious entity which seems to refer to itself as a separate entity to Games Workshop. This may be for tax reasons, I'm not entirely sure. A magazine that sees itself rough around the edges and speaks to fans directly through this wonderful new thing called the internet. It's almost pitched as a fresh take on the brand, rather than just kind of continuing where they left off with a confused marketing strategy to adults and children, with these niche and gritty worlds they've created kind of moving more towards the adult market. And keeping the two mainline Warhammer franchises kind of kid marketing centric, a brand for veteran gamers kind of makes sense. Oh, this alone gives me a no goals allowed treehouse sign vibe, and that's kinda sad. There's custom rules, custom campaigns and fluff pieces, ads for tournaments. There's a guide on how to effectively replace a leader if he dies in Necromunda, and a guide on how to block better in Blood Bowl. And this stuff is great because it really feels like the questions and discussions and answers they've had online have made their way into print. And as much as in layout and publication, obviously this feels a lot like White Dwarf, which is the mainline magazine, the custom-tailored content to what is understandably a niche clientele is quite surprising to see. It's certainly more than just a White Dwarf for your side pieces. And surprisingly, it's pretty community-focused. Respect. In issue 9, there's a terrain workshop, which in all honesty is just a dick swinger section to show off some of your stuff. Minus a few exceptions, GW have universally been pretty shash at terrain tutorials. Even in books dedicated to it like this, they've got some amazing stuff, but uh-oh, we fucked up and didn't take any work in progress shots, so I guess just look at it instead. Like, I don't want to know how to make aluminium mesh, I want to make that watchtower. Tell me how to make the watchtower. Jesus Christ, GW. Back on track. How was Inquisitor supported? Well, there's character creation guides, which is great, and a lot of in-depth custom scenarios. Not just narrative, but there's specs and stats all ready to go. So let's finally talk about the Inquisitor models, because ultimately, despite everything else, these are kind of like the ultimate curiosity and what everyone remembers about that franchise. Straight away, they're in 54mm scale, which for the time was fucking huge. This is pushing that premium brand idea. It costs the same as a regular Warhammer vehicle or a large unit, and if you want it to look good, you gotta be a certain level of painter. Kind of like the way 28mm and say 75mm models differ. There's kind of a whole new load of skills you need to learn to paint stuff at a larger scale. And arguably a certain amount of prestige is attributed to that larger style. And Inquisitor leans into that. So you're buying into the premium brand? Well, you're gonna need to be a premium painter then. Not that that's the truth of it, that's just how you sell it. And there's way more minis for Inquisitor than I have here, of course. But that's not saying much. I mean, I'm pretty amazed that I managed to find a rulebook in a local pickup, let alone a miniature, let alone 6 miniatures sealed. 5 miniatures sealed. So, what the hell am I going to do with these miniatures, or megatures, I suppose we should call them because they're so big? Well, for starters, I am never going to play this. I would like to, but it's such a huge undertaking and I just don't have the time for it. Unless the next 6 videos you want to see from me are me sat on the shitter reading that book chapter by chapter, which I don't think you do. I've got 6 figures, well, 5 figures now, wherever the 6th one's gone. You know, I could just list them on eBay and pull enough together to get myself, you know, another really nice prime lens. And sensibly speaking, that's absolutely what I should do. Fuck it. So I'm gonna do Artemis, partly because he's a Space Marine and that's gonna sell me a nice video thumbnail. He's also the cheapest model of the lot, and well, Space Marines are pretty damn MS Paints friendly. While I slapper this boy together with some super glue and accelerator, I should mention the MS Paints Patreon. We're a chilled hobby community consisting of differently abled makers and painters, folks who are just starting out, returning veterans, movers and shakers, additional needs, tremors, and just people wanting to support the channel. It's a truly inspiring group that are always open to chat, throw cat pictures around and share tips with each other on their work. You can join for as little as £3 a month, and I'm on hand via direct message or Discord to help in any way I can. And higher tiers can get you video chats, hobby coaching sessions, whatever you fancy. Disability can be a bastard of a thing, but we're discovering new ways to get around our limitations every day. Check it out when you can. Cheers. So let's get this boy painted. I've got about 3 hours to spend on it, so you know that I'm going to be using an airbrush, and as much as I hate to see my audience retention rates drop at the mere mention of an airbrush, this is MS Paints, and I'm not making work for myself, and neither should you. Speaking of saving time, let's hit this guy with some Vallejo metal colour, beginning with magnesium. Thanks to Josh at the Pickle Jar for recommending this paint to me. And then I'm going to spray it out from above with another MS Paints favourite, dark aluminium from the same range. This gives us a metallic xenophil highlight. I'll then spray underneath with some acrylic ink for shadows. You'll see why in a minute, but the idea behind this is that we create our sources of light and darkness before we apply colour. I'm spraying a little extra ink on the trims and some recess areas. I guess this classes as pre-shading. Yeah, we'll go with that. Now you're either going to love this or hate this, but I love it purely for its simplicity. Green Stuff World Candy Ink Sapphire Blue. Green Stuff World specialises in what I call gimmick paints, and there are gimmicks like Beaver Cleavage, and then there's great gimmicks like Mr. Brody Lee. And Green Stuff World fall into the Mr. Brody Lee category for sure. As Shigeru Miyamoto once said in the hit song, I love cheap thrills, and this is definitely cheap, and I definitely love it. Speaking of cheap, I'm heading back in with some ivory to provide a base for my contrast paints later. Gun is red, and red is a colour, and the gun will be that colour. I'm just going to pick out a few spots with the contrast, and if I remember, which I definitely won't, I'll be sure and layer those up with highlights later. Vallejo Liquid Gold is a one-coat metallic and mercifully illuminates itself, so to speak. Be careful when applying it because with the low surface tension it has, it can absolutely go everywhere. It doesn't look particularly special for the camera, but in person you really appreciate how it reacts to the lights. After some highlighting, I'm going to hit this with a Gilliman Flesh contrast paint. Nothing fancy, and you could definitely dry brush this up later if you want to lose some of the red that this introduces. Big Red Gun gets a wash with Army Painter Strong Tone. This I will highlight as it is a key focus point on the model. I'm shit at faces, but who isn't? Even Odo in Star Trek never got the hang of faces, so you know, never mind. And at this scale, I don't have as bad a time as I usually do. Cheap and cheerful eyes just use a fine liner pen. With multiple sclerosis, I have zero interest in doing this with a brush, so a fine liner pen is absolutely the way to go. We're going to do a quick and easy rubble, rock and sand base with my smashed up plaster mixed and some sand. And once we've got a dog shit coloured, a simple cream dry brush will do what it needs to do to bring the edges out. And of course finish with some weathering powder so that no one knows how shoddy this otherwise looks. Thankfully these models come with a pin on the bottom to help anchor them down. And yeah, he's alright. Spent about 3 hours on him, 3.5 hours, and he's got enough going on to make folks stop and look at him. Also, he's a big bastard, so that'll turn a few heads anyway. So why did I ultimately end up jobbing out and doing a gimmick paint job on this guy? Like when people ask you how you got a six-pack and your response is, well, just a lot of hard work and eating right. Nobody wants to hear that. They want to know that you drank a load of green stuff, world ink, and you got ripped. Yeah, we'll go with that. So that, in a nutshell, I guess, was Inquisitor. Big ideas, big book, big models, and just kind of lacking the excellence of execution it needed out of the gate to keep it afloat. I've certainly enjoyed painting what I've painted, and I've enjoyed looking through the books and the fluff and the magazines, but would I pick this up in 2021, even though technically I did pick it up, but would I pick it up with the intention of playing it? No. And that's just from my perspective, of course. Like, if you're into this stuff and it's worth your time, then it's certainly probably worth investing in Inquisitor. And of course, you can absolutely play this with 28mm models. In fact, that's probably preferable given the amount of range and choice you have in that line now. But as a roleplay game, it's just not something I have time for. I don't even really have time to sit and read the book all the way through. There's absolutely just not a fucking chance I'm going to be able to get like 4 people in the same room once every 2 weeks on a schedule. No fucking way. But as I say, I have well and truly enjoyed going through this stuff and painting one of the models. Thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers, I'm out of here.